In today's episode, we dig beneath the floorboards to explore the unsung hero of civilization, the foundation. We begin by examining the 1815 rubble foundation of an old home, my old home, revealing the essential principles of soil mechanics and the dangers of frost heave. We then trace the history of concrete from the ancient Romans to the peritite crisis of the 1980s, culminating in a discussion of modern reinforced concrete and the terrifying physics of liquefaction. Essential learning for anyone who lives indoors. Welcome back, everyone. Unless it's your first time tuning in, then
nice for you to see what the coolest podcast in town is.
It's a show where my kids ask questions and I answer them. But these aren't baby kids questions. They're questions that most people take for granted without ever looking beyond the surface. And who better to ask than kids? Because kids are curious.
Why's that, Dad?
Because you aren't afraid to admit you don't know something and you haven't been here long enough to take something for granted. Anyways, today we'll be doing our first podcast series. You see, I bought a house earlier in the year and it's old. Built in 1815, but it's had additions put on. It's a fixer-upper, and Dominic here has been helping me with it. As we fix stuff, we learn a lot, because I have to research what it is I'm doing. And this house has me asking a lot of questions.
Yeah, like what on earth made you take on this endeavor? You bit off more than you could chew.
I did, but it'll be great when it's all done. Anyways, in our series, we'll be talking about the basics of a home. The foundation, the framing, the sheathing, the electrical and plumbing, etc. And we'll give the science, history, and cultural implications of that. And today, it's the foundation.
Good thing you didn't start with the roof. That'd really show you don't know what you're talking about.
Okay, so starting with the foundation, we'll venture to our 1815 rubble foundation in this New England home we have before moving to the newer sections. Let's go down there. Watch your head, Dominic. We're starting right here in the oldest part of the house, the 1815 crawl space. It's dark, dusty, and it smells like wet history. Touch the wall. It's cold. Even in the summer. That's the Earth's constant temperature speaking.
It smells like old dirt and wet rocks. Why does a house need a foundation anyway? Can't we just put the floor in the bare earth?
That is the core question. A foundation is the essential buffer between the rigid house and the dynamic living earth. If we just set the floor on the earth, the house would sink, rot, and fall apart. The foundation's job is twofold: load distribution and moisture management. It's a peace treaty between human ambition and geological reality. Shine your light here. Look closely at this wall. This is a classic rubble foundation. In 1815, the builder of this house didn't order truckloads of stone. He walked his fields after the spring thaw, pulling field stones from the soil, glacial leftovers. These weren't shaped, they were found. Stacked dry or with a weak lime mortar, they were relying entirely on mass, friction, and gravity to do the work. The only way this works is by understanding soil mechanics. Every type of soil, clay, sand, silt, has a different personality, a different bearing capacity. That is, the maximum load it can withstand before it simply squishes out. Think of clay as stubborn but plastic. It holds weight but moves slowly over time. Sand is strong but fickle. It can bear weight but wash away with water. If the house's weight is too concentrated, the soil fails, leading to settlement. The wide, irregular base of this rubble foundation spreads the house's massive weight out, which reduces the pressure.
So the rubble foundation is like snowshoes for the house?
That's a perfect analogy. It spreads the weight so you don't sink. But they also had to fight an invisible seasonal enemy, the frost. They had to dig below the frost line, the depth where groundwater freezes in the coldest winter, to prevent frost heave. Water expands by 9% in volume when it freezes. That expansion is relentless. It can lift a railroad track or a school bus, and that upward pressure can snap a foundation like a steel breadstick. And crucially, the house must be kept off the bare earth because of moisture. Wood in constant contact with the ground invites rot and insects. Termites don't need an invitation. They need a bridge, or carpenter ants. A wood sill connection is that bridge. The rubble foundation manages moisture by letting it flow through the gaps and drain away, rather than trying to block it. It's a breathable foundation.
So that explains why there is water in this old part of the basement. It comes in during every rain.
Yeah, and that causes high moisture content, but it hasn't gone anywhere. So the builder must have thought about the soil's bearing capacity before building. But the theory of foundations is full of dramatic failures when engineers misjudge the soil's bearing capacity, the most famous being the Leaning Tower of Pisa. It has a shallow, 3-meter foundation built on soft, compressive, silty clay. The tower began sinking on one side, before the third story was even finished. They tried to compensate by making the upper floors taller on the sinking side, which just added more weight. It's a monument to ongoing, managed failure. And then there was the Empress Hotel in Victoria, Canada. It was built on a reclaimed mudflat, of all places. The story goes that the architect, Francis Rattenbury, knew the ground was terrible. They drove thousands of Douglas fir piles, but they never hit bedrock. They were just floating on friction. As the hotel slowly sank, up to 30 inches over the 20th century, the staff had a running joke. They'd build new steps down to the garden, and a few years later, they'd have to build another set as the old ones disappeared into the muck. The foundation wasn't a static base. It was a slow-motion dive.
Wow, the ground is way more complicated than it looks. It's almost alive. So how did we move from the loose, leftover rocks to the smooth walls of the kitchen foundation?
That brings us to the concrete revolution, when we stopped just using rock and started making rock. Let's move to the 1940s edition. We're now standing next to the 1940s poured concrete foundation. Run your hand over it. It's seamless, a structural monolith. This was poured in a day, a frantic, noisy day of wooden forms, shooting concrete, and men tamping it down. It represents speed and uniformity, but to understand this wall and its crack, we have to start 2,000 years ago.
Is that when people discovered concrete?
Yep, the concept was perfected by the Romans, starting in the 2nd century BC. Their concrete, called opus cementium, was so superior that its recipe was arguably the Roman Empire's most valuable trade secret, and it was lost for over a millennium. The secret wasn't just lime, it was pozzolana, volcanic ash from the slopes of Mount Vesuvius. This ash contained silica and alumina that reacted with lime and water to form a binder that actually loved water. The Romans built harbors with it. Take the port of Caesarea, built by Herod the Great. They built wooden forms directly in the Mediterranean Sea and poured this concrete underwater. While our modern concrete would dissolve, Roman concrete cured and hardened into brine, becoming a single, storm-resistant piece of architecture. It's still there today. But the crowning achievement is the Pantheon's dome. It's 142 feet in diameter, made of progressively lighter concrete mixes with pumice at the top. It, even today, is the largest unreinforced concrete dome in the world. Modern scientists have discovered the self-healing property of this concrete. Cracks allow seawater or groundwater to seep in, reacting with the ash to form new aluminum tobermite crystals that literally glue the crack shut. The Romans built foundations that could repair themselves. That knowledge faded. It wasn't until 1824 that an English bricklayer named Joseph Aspdin patented a formula for Portland cement, named for its resemblance to the gray limestone of Portland, Isle. He literally cooked limestone and clay in his kitchen kiln. It was the start of an industry that now produces over 4 billion tons of cement globally every year.
And I thought it was called Portland because it was from Portland, Maine. Learn something new every day.
Same here. Always wondered that. Well, modern concrete is a deceptively simple composite. It has the aggregate, which is sand and gravel for bulk and strength, water, and the cement, binder. But the magic is in the cement. It's made by calcination, heating limestone and clay to an intense 1,450 degrees Celsius to form a new compound called clinker. When you add water, an exothermic reaction called hydration occurs. The water isn't just drying. It's being chemically absorbed to form a jungle of interlocking calcium silicate hydrate gel crystals. The concrete isn't drying, it's growing a microscopic skeleton. And because of this, it's improper to say that cement is drying out because the water actually is part of the gel structure.
Oh, wow.
This process gives concrete incredible compressive strength, the ability to resist squeezing. That's why it works well for walls and pillars. But this 1940s wall reveals its fatal flaw. Shine your light here. See that deep diagonal crack running like a lightning bolt from the top corner to the bottom?
I see it. It's huge. Why'd it break if the concrete is so strong?
Because concrete is, ironically, disastrously weak in tensile strength. the ability to resist pulling apart. This addition was built onto an older, settled house. Over decades, it settled unevenly, a form of differential settlement. Imagine the ground under this corner sinking just an inch more than the rest. The wall tried to stretch itself to bridge that gap, putting it in tensile stress. Concrete can't stretch. It holds a grudge, and so it snapped. Most homes have a gentle, uniform settlement. This one had an argument with the ground, and the ground won.
But not everyone has a basement. Auntie Kiara's place in Texas didn't have a basement.
In northern climes like ours, this is still dictated by the frost line, about 4 feet deep. If you have to dig 4 feet down anyway to escape the ice, you might as well dig 2 more and get a basement. It's a bonus space born of necessity. But in warmer places, like in Auntie Kiara's place, it isn't needed because the frost line isn't deep, and in places like Florida or New Orleans, the water table is so high that digging a basement would create a bathtub. They use a shallow, slab-on-grade foundation instead, where the concrete is poured right on the prepared soil. This is more affordable than a basement or crawl space. Different problems, different solutions.
What do you mean a bathtub?
The water table is so high it would constantly seep in, and, if high enough, could float in theory because of buoyancy.
Whoa. But water does get into many people's basement, including ours, because of cracks and porosity of concrete, and the rubble foundation it's designed for. But how do we handle water when it isn't planned?
To manage the water that still gets through, we use a sump pump. Grandma's and Grandpa's house has one, and it's running all the time because of the high water table. It's a sentry against flooding, unless the power goes out, and then you're in trouble. That's happened to them a number of times. Growing up, before we had a French drain installed, water would get a few inches high in the basement. Water getting in all the time encourages mold and mildew and rot, so it's important to keep water out. If you don't have a sump pump, like us, gravity is your friend. We have a pipe that goes outside and takes all the water with it, downhill. But there's something worse than water that gets down in basements. An invisible, silent threat. Radon.
That's the radioactive thing you mentioned earlier. What is it?
Radon is a colorless, odorless, radioactive gas. It comes from the natural decay of uranium found in rock and soil. Uranium breaks down into radium, which breaks down into radon gas. Because it's a gas, it moves up through the soil. Here's the physics part. Houses act like a giant vacuum. We heat the air inside, hot air rises and leaves through the attic, creating negative pressure in the basement. This is called the stack effect. It literally sucks gas out of the dirt and into the basement through those tiny cracks, or the gap where the wall meets the floor. The tragic thing about radon is that it's invisible, which is why it often goes undetected until it's too late. It's the second leading cause of lung cancer in the U.S., causing 21,000 deaths a year. The danger became national news in the 1980s because of an incredible incident involving a man named Stanley Watrous. He was an engineer working at the Limerick nuclear power plant in Pennsylvania.
So he had radon poisoning?
Well, he's the man who set off the nuclear alarm on his way into work.
What?
That's right. Every day, Watrous would pass through radiation detectors at the power plant, which was still under construction and had no nuclear fuel yet. One day, the alarms went off when he walked in. Investigators couldn't figure out why he was contaminated until they tested his clothes, and then his house. They found the air inside his new home had radon levels reaching 2,700 picocuries per liter.
What does that number mean?
I don't know. Just kidding. Picocuries per liter. That's a small amount, 1/trillionth of a curie, which is its radiation amount. But it means the air he was breathing at home was more radioactive than the air inside many uranium mines. The recommended action level is 4 picocuries per liter. The Watrous family was unknowingly living in a hazard zone. They had to evacuate immediately, and their home became an EPA lab. This shocking discovery proved that radon wasn't just a localized rare problem, but a widespread danger hiding right beneath their floors. It was a tragedy waiting to happen, and Watrous' story made the whole country realize that any home could be at risk.
Slight tangent, but Dad, did you know that that bananas contain 3,500 picocuries per kilogram of radioactive potassium-40? That seems high too.
Yes, but you don't breathe that in. We'll cover radiation in another episode, but radon is not something to brush off lightly.
Whoa, so the Foundation has to keep out the weather, the freezing, and invisible poison gas. Is there anything else the Foundation has to fight?
Yes, especially locally in Connecticut. But let's move to the newest section of the house, the 1990s Master Bedroom Edition. This foundation is a product of all our past failures. It has a hidden skeleton inside. Rebar.
I've seen them use it on forged and fire. I take it isn't just for knife making? But rebar helps. It doesn't hurt the foundation. You said there was something else the foundation had to fight.
I'm getting to it, but first let's talk about rebar.
That's a horrible segue into the next topic, Dad. Who wrote the script? ChatGPT?
Hey, just wait a second. I'm getting there. But first, rebar. The advent of rebar in the 19th century solved the tensile strength issue, creating reinforced concrete, the perfect symbiotic structural material. The concrete handles all the compression from the house's weight, and the steel, with its incredible tensile strength, handles all the tension from ground movement. They are the ultimate odd couple. One brittle but strong in compression, the other flexible and strong in tension. Together they build skyscrapers. Interestingly enough, they even have a similar thermal expansion rate. That means that as they heat up, they expand at the same rate. It's like they're made for each other.
Coincidence? I think not. Aliens. It's always aliens.
Just like the pyramids. You would think that with rebar, they perfected foundation building. Okay, now here's the other failure story I wanted to talk about. But even with the perfect materials, engineers can be defeated by the basics, the soil. The classic example is in the liquefaction event in Niigata, Japan, in 1964. A massive earthquake hit. Witnesses described the ground itself turning into a churning gray soup. Apartment buildings, built with strong, reinforced concrete, didn't crumple. They simply tipped over, gently, almost politely, onto their sides. People walked out of windows that were now skylights. The earthquake had shaken the water-saturated sand beneath them until the pore pressure overcame the friction between sand grains. The solid ground lost all its shear strength and flowed like a liquid. The buildings were fine, but their foundation literally vanished from beneath them. The opposite type of failure happened here in New England, the peritite crisis. In the 1980s and 90s, thousands of homes in Connecticut and Massachusetts were built with concrete from a quarry that, unknowingly, was contaminated with peritite.
Oh yeah, this happened to one of our neighbors.
It did, unfortunately. It was a silent chemistry bomb in the aggregate. Peritite is an iron sulfide mineral. It's stable when dry, but encase it in concrete, bury it in damp earth, and expose it to oxygen and water, it begins to oxidize, like a slow rusting from the inside. This rusting expands in volume, generating incredible internal pressure, up to 7,000 pounds per square inch. Think of millions of tiny jacks inside your wall, all pushing outwards. It crushes the calcium silicate hydrate gel, the very glue of concrete. The wall doesn't just crack, it crumbles into a soft, coarse sand. I've seen photos, a basement wall you could scoop out with your hand. The human cost was staggering. Not in lives, but can you imagine your largest financial asset, your home, becoming structurally worthless, unsellable? Homeowners were stuck with repair bills of $150,000 to $300,000. There were lawsuits, bankruptcies, divorces. It wasn't just a construction failure. It was a social and economic disaster. It's a stark lesson. You can engineer for forces you can see, but chemistry doesn't care about your calculations. So, this 1990s edition represents our best effort to fight all threats. Rebar fights tensile failure, wider engineered footings fight poor bearing capacity, and hopefully, rigorous aggregate testing fights chemical decay. Hopefully.
It makes the rubble foundation look easy, but also really smart for its time. They used what they had, where they were.
Exactly. Every era of construction in our house is a time capsule of human problem solving. It shows engineers and builders looking at yesterday's failure and saying, how do we fix that? That's the story of technology. It's not a straight line up. It's a spiral of solving old problems and sometimes creating new ones. And as we near the end of the podcast, I realize that I've only been focusing on America and one instance in Japan and our modern way of living. But there are many people globally who don't live in traditional American homes. Anywhere from 700 million to 1.9 billion people live in earthen dwellings, and the UN estimates that 2.8 billion people have inadequate housing. But my heart really goes out to the 1.1 billion people who live in slums. We take this concrete foundation for granted. I don't love my rubble foundation, but I really need to count my blessings because there are so many who don't have a loving home at all. Not to make this a sob story, but those that have inadequate houses suffer from all the troubles we've tried to overcome with reinforced concrete foundations. All right, are you ready to quiz the listeners?
I was born ready. Here are 3 questions to see if you're actually listening to the deep dive. Post the correct answers in the comments section. We'll read your name at the end of the next episode. And let us know the scariest memory you've had in a basement, because basements can be creepy, especially the one in Home Alone. Alrighty, question 1. The Romans used volcanic ash in their concrete that gave it a unique ability to heal its own cracks, even underwater. What is the name of that volcanic ash? Question 2. What specific mineral, when contaminating aggregate, oxidizes and causes the catastrophic crumbling foundation failure seen in the Connecticut-Massachusetts crisis? And question 3. In the 1964 Niigata earthquake, strong apartment buildings tipped over intact because the soil underwent a process where it lost all strength and behaved like a liquid. What is the name of this soil mechanics phenomenon?
Great job, John. And to our listeners, if you enjoyed digging into the literal foundations of a civilization, please consider leaving us a 5-star review on your podcast app. It helps other curious people find the show.
And don't forget to check out our YouTube channel, Contemplative Chaos.
Thanks for listening. Remember, the world is full of questions.
You just have to be curious enough to ask, why is that, Dad?
See ya.